What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. Week 1 is in the books. Time to take a look at the waiver wire for week 2. Usually, the early weeks of the season are the best time to attack the waiver wire since we learn so much about roles early on, and there's typically a lot that happens that we were not expecting. This week, we definitely have some players that we're going to want to go after. But honestly, there weren't a lot of players that actually broke out this week or had way stronger roles than expected. A lot of that probably has to do with just total plays being way down in week 1, just across the board. Someone tweeted it out. I forget exactly what the stat was, but on average, if we look at like the average plays per game last season, very few teams even hit the average. It was like 2 or 3 teams like through the games on Sunday that had even league average plays run from last season. So when we see games approach average a little bit more often, we're going to see more fantasy production, which then we can maybe have some players breaking out. With that being said, though, again, there are a few names we definitely need to go over. So let's start breaking them down. Number 1 player, got to be Isaiah Likely. My guess, though, is that I'm going to be lower than the field on him. I do not think he's worth using a number 1 claim on unless you waited really long at the tight end position, you double dipped, and you missed on both those double dips. Maybe you drafted 2 that like literally did nothing in week 1 and you're like, I don't want them, or I don't want one of them. I think Likely's the best player to go after. Then it's fine. And I know he had a really strong week, but we got to kind of understand like what happened, what led to that week. The Chiefs were double teaming, triple teaming at times Mark Andrews. Every single play, there were multiple people around him. They were focusing on him, saying, we are going to take him away and force you to beat us with your other players. And to be honest, that's something they've done in the past. He's now played 5 games in his career against Kansas City. He has yardage totals of 0, 14, 15, 22, and 57. So he's never had a good game in his career against Kansas City because they always scheme him away. Then you think, you're like, okay, so not only did that happen, opening up targets for everyone else, Baltimore threw the ball 41 times, and they were ahead for less than 2.5 minutes all game. So you have KC selling out to stop Mark Andrews. Lamar forced to throw the ball the 6th most times of his career, including the playoffs. How many times is Baltimore going to run into a game script like this? 1, maybe 2 more times all season. And in those games, are their opponents going to double and triple team Mark Andrews? Probably not. It's probably not going to happen, especially given the performance from Likely. Teams going to see this and be like, okay, if we plan on actually doing that, we got to account for the fact that they're just going to dump off to Likely a bunch of times. And he's a good player. Again, I'm not saying he's not a good player, but even in this spot, it's not like Likely had a 90% snap share. He was still relatively low. I just think better than last season. Again, I don't want to say low in the sense that like last year, I mean, he would play like 30% of the snaps when he had Mark Andrews healthy. He was much higher this season, but Andrews is not going to be that bad. They're not going to scheme him away that much every game, and they're also not going to throw it that much. So pass attempts are going to drop. More of those pass attempts are going to go to Mark Andrews, and we could very easily see Likely go out there, have 2 receptions for 20 yards next week, and a ton of people, I can guarantee you, are going to start him and then be like, oops, I probably should not have done that. So I get it. I get being hyped around him, especially given how poorly pretty much every single other tight end was this week. And I'd be fine spending 8, 9, 10% of your fab on him, kind of just depending on how much you need tight end. But definitely, you know, if you have the top guys, you've got Kelsey, Laporta, Pitts, Andrews, Kincaid, McBride. We'll see with Kittle tonight, but Kittle, like you have those guys, you probably just wouldn't, or maybe put him in to try and trade him after that. But I would still obviously be starting all of them over Likely. But if you have Njoku, if you have Ferguson, maybe you have to go after him because they're probably going to miss some time. Behind Andrews, I think the top claim is Bucky Irving. He outproduced Rachaad White in rushing EPA per attempt, rushing yards over expected per attempt, success rate, and overall production. So not only was the actual metric solid, the underlying metrics were great for him as well. He was also way more active than I anticipated in week 1. I love Bucky Irving. I've said many times, I think Bucky Irving is underrated by the community. I really liked him this offseason. I mean, we talked at length about how people will underrate him because of his size, but that he is a massive threat to Rachaad White's role, especially since Rachaad White was really only good in fantasy last season because of extreme volume. We were like, okay, that's probably going to come down. That all played out in week 1, and I thought that would play out in week 4, 5, 6. Like we typically see these rookies have a much smaller role to start the season and then slowly ramp up. Jalen Wright wasn't even active, Tyron Tracy Jr. not having an expanded role. Trey Benson not having much of a role. Like these players that we were talking about last week being like, they're going to have roles as we get into the season, but probably not right away. It was right away for Bucky Irving. And so that's a huge concern if you have Rachaad White. If anything, I mean, he played so well and Rachaad White was his usual inefficient self. You got to think more touches are going Bucky Irving's way. So Bucky needs to be rostered 100% of leagues. I think he's the number 1 running back claim, and he'd be the number 1 at all positions besides. Likely, again, we're going a little bit in order to start here. But yeah, I don't know that anyone is worth a number 1 claim overall, but it depends on your spot. If you went RB0, you went hero RB, you need that running back too. I don't know how much I would trust Bucky Irving as a running back too right now, but I can tell you that it's very possible his role starts to expand as we work our way through the season. And if he's already out there producing really, really well, and we knew going into the season he was a very good scheme fit for this rushing offense, if you had to spend 10, 11% of your fab to get him and you needed running back production, you needed some upside on your bench there, great player to go after. After those two, small bump down into Brandin Cooks. Honestly, I would imagine in most competitive leagues he is not available in free agency. I looked and I was like, why is he available in so many leagues? I just thought he was rostered at a way higher rate than he was. I mean, it's just a little bit obvious why you would want Brandin Cooks, number 2 wide receiver on one of the highest volume passing offenses in the league. It's not like he crushed it this week, but he still did fine. They didn't air it out at all. They were playing Cleveland. Cleveland is a great pass defense. They were also winning the whole game. There was like just no reason to air it out, like no reason to go pass heavy. There's going to be plenty of weeks where Dallas throws the ball a ton and Brandin Cooks has a really good game. So obviously good. I just don't know why he's not rostered in as many leagues as he is. Cooks, after him, we go down into a duo of Bigsby and Jordan Mason. Again, I don't know yet, right? I'm going to release this before the Monday night game. I don't know what's going to happen with Jordan Mason. This is just me anticipating that Mason is going to be the clear number 2. Not that he's going to have some massive role, but all he needs to be is the clear number 2 to mix in here and there and be backing up, Christian McCaffrey. That should be rostered 100% of leagues, because if McCaffrey were to ever go down, Mason obviously a phenomenal pick, so he needs to be rostered. And then Bigsby is as well. Like, I didn't believe it for a while. Then I started to believe the hype this offseason because every player, every beat reporter, everything was telling us that Bigsby was better than he was as a rookie. So then I started to believe it. And honestly, I don't think any of you actually believed me every time I was saying it. I mean, he's better. Like it's just so glaringly obvious when you watch him play in week 1 that he is significantly better than last season. And it's almost the reverse of what happened last season, right? So last season, they throw him out there in week 1 and they're like, okay, please be good enough to spell Travis Etienne at any point. Like, you're not going to be the number 1. You're not pushing for that role, but be good enough to where we don't have to overload Etienne with touches. And he was terrible, and he also fumbled multiple times early in the season. I believe in week 1, he fumbled on a goal line carry as well. The reverse happened this week. Like, Tank Bigsby was great. Not on every touch or anything, but he clearly looked a lot better, and he looked solid. Etienne was the one who wasn't that great on the ground, and he fumbled, literally a game-losing fumble. Like it was not a walk-in touchdown, but a touchdown to where 98% of running backs are scoring on that play. Right through the middle, getting tackled like inside the 5-yard line. Clearly momentum carrying you into the end zone, was going to score. Fumbles the ball into the end zone. Miami recovers. Miami ends up tying the game, winning the game, and a game-winning field goal. Like they probably win that game had he not fumbled into the end zone. I don't think that's going to impact things. I don't think, because it's like, Etienne was a starter last year and they benched Tank because of that, because they could. They can't really afford to bench Travis Etienne. So I don't think anything's going to come of this. But if Etienne remains highly inefficient and Tank continues to look good, I mean, they split the carries this week. If they continue to split the carries, that is a huge negative for Travis Etienne and a big positive for Bigsby because he's got a role and then he's got that upside. If Etienne got injured, Bigsby would be a featured running back and someone that is highly useful in fantasy. So I think all three of those running backs I've talked about so far need to be rostered in 100% of leagues. I would say this next one probably needs to be rostered in 90% of leagues, but Jaleel McLaughlin, I know the end result was mediocre because Denver just did not play well, but way better role for Jaleel than we figured. Like I thought it was a lock, basically, that Javonte Williams would be the early down running back. He was not. Like Jaleel played more than Javonte Williams on early downs. He got more carries, and he also had 5 receptions. He did absolutely nothing with those receptions and did virtually nothing with those carries. But to be fair, no one did anything on the team. So it wasn't like, he got this role, but then Javonte Williams was so much better. Like none of these running backs did anything. If anything, like Estime theoretically did the best on his 2 touches, but that wild fumble that he definitely shouldn't have had. But anyways, we'll talk about Estime in a second. Yeah, like the role was just so much better than we thought it was going to be for Jaleel McLaughlin. I understand being hesitant going after him, but he had 15 touches. Like any running back on any team that has 15 touches as the lead back on the offense with 33% of those coming in the receiving game, like just has to be rostered. You can't have that in free agency. I'm not saying start him. That just cannot be on free agency. So again, Bucky Irving, Tank Bigsby, Jordan Mason, they need to be rostered in 100% of leagues. 90% probably should be rostered for Jaleel McLaughlin. I'm talking about like 12-team leagues right now. Obviously, all 100% in 10-team leagues, or in like leagues, 14, 16, and on. I would say 10-team leagues depends on how good your team is. Maybe some of you just have like these monster 10-team leagues and you kind of can't afford some of these guys. But again, those are the running backs I'm going after. If they're not available, if you want some other ones to look at, I think that this next list is like fine, and I think I definitely have to talk about them. But if you have a solid team, you probably don't need to roster any of these other running backs behind them. Alexander Madison, Ray Davis, Marshawn Lloyd, Estime, and Miles Sanders. And then we can kind of throw Zach Charbonnet in there as well. I think Charbonnet is probably rostered in all competitive leagues, but if he's not, we have a potential injury for Walker. I don't think it's anything major. I don't think he'll even miss time, but Charbonnet should be rostered in the chance that Walker ever missed time. But those other ones, Madison looked good on his touchdown, but I mean, take away the touchdown, he didn't really do anything. Also, he's just not a player you're ever going to trust. I also do think that Dylan Lobb is going to be activated at some point. I believe he's a healthy scratch this week, but like again, rookies kind of see those roles expand. I think at some point he will be activated. He will get some touches over Madison. I will say Madison looked decent. They kind of had to go to him though because the Chargers actually, we'll talk about that in a second. They are the #1 ranked run defense through 1 week, like in terms of EPA per play allowed on the ground. #1. They were fantastic at stopping the run. If the Raiders are able to generate a little bit more on the ground, we're going to see a little bit more go to Zamir White. And again, I just don't think you need to really go after Madison. I don't think he's a long-term play, but in a deeper league, if he's going to have, a split with Zamir while also getting receiving work, he should be rostered in more leagues than he is because he's not really rostered anywhere. Ray Davis, just because he's a clear backup to James Cook. James Cook is the starter. James Cook is going to remain that probably while he stays healthy. But this is an offense that really wants to run the ball a lot more than we're expecting, or like than most people expect. Like we knew with the change of offense coordinator last season, how they ended last season, they were going to be more run heavy to start the year, but they ran the ball a ton in week 1. And if this is going to be any sort of indication of what we should expect moving forward, I mean, obviously he has upside, right? Ray Davis has significant upside if we ever saw an injury to Cook. Marshawn Lloyd, mixed results for Jacobs in his first game. Started off terrible, fantastic in the second half. Like he was amazing in the second half. And I mean, he was like a big portion of the offense there. Packers are going to be an amazing offense. They were amazing in week 1, but the injury. So we just don't really know right now with Jordan Love. Seems like he's only going to miss a few weeks, which would be a fantastic outcome if he only missed like 2 or 3 weeks. But yeah, everything we thought about the Packers basically came true in week 1. I believe, don't quote me on this, but I think their first in EPA per play through week 1. But they were fantastic. They definitely had, some growing pains on the offense. Like they definitely had some points where things fell apart a little bit, but they were still very, very strong on offense. They had great efficiency. but it's Love. Like, if any time Love misses, they're not going to be as good. But the thing with Lloyd would be, if they're going to be this good, he obviously has the upside if Jacobs were to get injured. But then again, it was mixed results for Jacobs. He was pretty terrible in the first half and pretty good in the second half. It's what do you get over the course of the season? If we see more of that first half, Lloyd can start to mix in a little bit more than we were hoping for having Jacobs. It's really just an upside play, and I think he can be back this week, so we'll just see what happens there. Estime, I said, kind of alluding to him before, he had a great first carry, and then he had a terrible fumble on that carry. They recovered it, so it's not the end of the world. I like his ceiling. 10-team leagues, no. 12-team leagues, probably don't need to go there if you have a decent roster, but deeper than that or deeper benches, I do like his upside long term. Miles Sanders, larger role than expected, didn't look terrible, but the Panthers look terrible overall. Brooks is going to come back at some point. We're probably going to look at him in 16-team leagues. Okay, that's running back. For wide receiver, again, Brandin Cooks was a clear number one, as I said. After him, I'd look at Romeo Dobbs, Rashid Shaheed, Demarcus Robinson, Wan'Dale Robinson, and then Jaleel McLaughlin. Dobbs, Shaheed, probably already roster, but I did want to mention them. I know Dobbs, I don't want to say had a dud. It was like 4 for 50, so honestly, this week, average score, it feels like. And Love's hurt. So again, I don't know how much we're really starting him while Love is out. But great by Love. He was clearly the number one wide receiver on this team. 87% of the snaps. You had Wicks and Watson rotating into that role. You had Reed pretty much only playing in 3 wide receiver sets. Like, Romeo Dobbs was their number one wide receiver. He just didn't have an amazing stat line. Love missed him a few times on some open routes. He could have had a much, much bigger game this week. You have the semi-dud. You have Love getting hurt. I don't think people are going to really go after him, but they should. And if someone has him, I think you can buy him very, very cheaply. This week we will talk about him in the trade video. Shaheed, he was good. I still maintain that in like a season-long league, he's a really difficult start because he kind of needs that really long touchdown, and they're not going to drop 50 every week, right? They're not going to play the Panthers every week. I don't think I'd go after him aggressively, but he's got a strong role in the offense, and if he's out there, I'd go after him. Demarcus Robinson, 92% snap share. Cooper Kupp is going to be league winner this season if he stays healthy, but he's not going to maintain a 43% target share. That was just things falling apart because you don't go into the game assuming Puka's going to get hurt, right? Like, Puka and Kupp probably would have each had around a 28-30% target share in this game had Puka stayed healthy. But once you have that injury, they just leaned on Kupp. If Puka is going to miss some time, they're going to have a week to game plan and get Demarcus Robinson, get Tyler Johnson a little bit more involved offensively. And if Demarcus is going to play every single snap, you're going to want him in fantasy. Wan'Dale Robinson, 12 targets and a carry. That's 13 opportunities. Only 58 yards on those 13 opportunities. So not amazing. Daniel Jones will not be the quarterback all season. But this week, playing the Commanders, they have the worst defense in the NFL. He could literally be a spot start this week, especially in full PPR leagues. McMillan only had the 1 reception. And it did go for the touchdown. That's unfortunate for those of us who really like him long-term because we could have gotten him so much cheaper than we could have. He could have had a monster game. He was open deep for a touchdown on the first drive. Baker missed him, and there's a defensive penalty, so no stats count on that one. Then Baker overthrew him by like a couple inches. I would say like McMillan probably could have caught the ball, but a little bit too far. That would have been a 38-yard touchdown a little bit later on. He had a walk-in 30-yard touchdown, but the defender realized that, committed pass interference to prevent the touchdown. So like, we could have pretty easily had 3 touchdowns from McMillan this week, and everyone would be super excited about that. Now people look at it and they're like, oh, he has the touchdown. Later on, but it's only on the 1 reception. Evans, Godwin, they're going to have this huge role. Like, McMillan played 83% of the snaps and could have 3 touchdowns. Like, that is a massive role for someone who's a rookie and was not a first-round pick. So, wheels up for McMillan. Plus, if people look at the underlying shots, right, they look at expected fantasy points. They look at air yards per play. The 2 potential touchdowns that he had were like there were defensive penalties. So we're not going to see expected fantasy points. We're not going to see air yards show up in his stat line. They were taken away. And so he had a much stronger game than people are going to project moving forward, with the caveat that, again, it was the Commanders. We're going to pick on the Commanders every single week this season. Outside of those receivers, you could take a flyer on Joshua Palmer, but Ladd is probably going to be their number one wide receiver this year. Palmer is their starting outside wide receiver, played the most snaps, but you'd like to see a little bit more than 15.4% target share. Josh Downs, you go after him, returns probably in anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. Fingers crossed that he looks good returning from the high ankle sprain. Jalen Polk, clear number one wide receiver for the Patriots soon. It's going to happen very soon. It wasn't that case in week 1, but in a few weeks, he will be the clear number one. They're not going to win a ton more games this season, so the pass rate should elevate. We're going to have May playing soon, so a lot of things going in Polk's favor soon, even though the production wasn't there in week 1. Tyler Johnson, alluded to him before. While Puka is out, he's going to have a stronger role, and I've always liked him as a player. And then Devon Veal, 8 receptions, 26 routes, right? That is awesome, right? In terms of like targets earned per route run, that is amazing for your first game in the NFL. 2.1 air yards per target is not amazing. I added him in Dynasty before the week started, feeling really good about that. But in a redraft league, he played well enough to where it's like, and he had a ton of hype in camp. So like this didn't come out of nowhere. If he actually maintained that sort of like targets per route run, that would be insane. He's not going to. But maybe they expand his role. Maybe they can push the ball a little bit more downfield moving forward. But it was really a situation where like he ran a bunch of like 5-yard hitches and they just kept hitting him. But it was like, you know, he'd need 20 of those to like actually make a difference in fantasy. And so not a ton of upside, but when you're a rookie and you have 8 receptions in week 1, we definitely need to talk about you. Someone you can definitely go after. Behind likely at tight end, you got a few options. Taysom Hill wasn't needed in the second half, so that's why the snaps were down. You can't really trust him, but how much do you trust any tight end right now? Colby Parkinson, 88% snap share, easily their top tight end with Higbee out. Not going to have a massive ceiling, but will be consistent at tight end, and he will be free in leagues. Jordan Akins, I got to mention him because people are going to talk about him. Only other tight end right now on the 53-man roster. Seems like Njoku's going to miss time with high ankle sprain. Not confirmed high ankle sprain yet, but it seems like it could be that. But I think they're just going to elevate someone else or like add someone. I just don't think they're going to go into every game wanting to start Akins as their top tight end. And then Tucker Kraft. I'm in love with the production so far. I mean, it's not like he had that great of a game, but he's my most rostered tight end on Underdog. I just took him in round 18 every single time I could. 96% snap share, out-snapped Musgrave 64-17 coming off an injury. He's their tight end 1. Now, again, Love hurt. That is going to impact all these Packers players, but when Love returns, going to be great. But, I mean, the games that Love misses, their backup quarterbacks are not good. They really need to go after Tannehill. They need to go after someone, figure things out until Love can come back. Quarterback streaming options this week. You got Baker at the Lions. He looked amazing week 1, but again, it was the Commanders. Everyone's going to look amazing against Commanders, but I mean, they're going to be trailing, so they're going to have to throw the ball a ton. He's got great weapons around him. Matthew Stafford at the Cardinals. Cardinals also going to be defense. We're attacking a lot. Stafford looked great. You would like Puka to be healthy enough to play. We don't yet know the injury there, but good enough offense where I'd still want to play Matthew Stafford. And then Daniel Jones, probably not going to make many starts this season, but at the Commanders, we're going to pick on them every single week that we can. I would say, though, I'll have a better idea of exactly who we should be streaming when the projections come out for week 2, which will be tomorrow. Defense, streaming options. Chargers at the Panthers. The Panthers had the lowest EPA per play, the 4th longest time to throw, the 9th highest quarterback pressure rate allowed, the 4th lowest yards per play. Then you have a Chargers team, who I said before, number 1 against the run in terms of EPA per play allowed. League average against the pass and generating pressure, but shouldn't matter. We're going to pick on the Panthers every week. Now, I really thought that Dave Canales was going to elevate this offense, or at least elevate Bryce Young a little bit, and that could still be the case, but my goodness, did Bryce Young look terrible in week 1. I don't know what the future holds for this offense, but I can tell you this, they need Jonathan Brooks, and until he returns and until they look half decent at all, we're going to pick on them for streaming defenses. Chiefs versus the Bengals. The Bengals played terrible for a team that allowed only 6 quarterback pressures. Like, you would think for how badly they played that Burrow was under pressure every play, but like Jamar Chase was out there and their running backs were healthy and they did not see any pressure at quarterback, and yet they were horrible on offense. T being back would help, but I mean, playing at Kansas City is a brutal place to play. You got the Jaguars versus the Browns. Cleveland had the 6th lowest EPA per play. They were the only team to allow more than 18 quarterback pressures, and they allowed 25. Not much of that was to do with Dallas being on the other side. Like, against most teams, they're not going to allow 25 pressures, but Watson looked terrible. The offensive line looked terrible, and Jacksonville was pretty respectable playing the Dolphins this week. Like, you think playing against the Miami Dolphins with time to prepare for Miami that they're going to rip you apart, and Jacksonville looked like pretty good on defense. Seahawks at the Patriots. Seattle had the 4th most quarterback pressures in week 1. They also allowed the 4th lowest EPA per play. A lot of that was probably to do with Bo Nix being at quarterback, but they still did that. And then New England allowed the highest quarterback pressure rate. I know it didn't seem like it, and I know that you can be sitting there with the Bengals defense being like, what the heck? I thought the Patriots were the matchup we're attacking. They are, since he just didn't get up. All you got to do is get up against the Patriots. They're going to allow a massive quarterback pressure rate. So you're going to have a potential to have 4, 5, 6 sacks in a game. And those really elevate the potential for turnovers, for a ton of scoring in fantasy. But you got to get ahead and force them to throw it, because New England wants to run the ball every play that they can. But again, they still allowed a massive quarterback pressure rate. It's just since he didn't really take advantage of that. Giants at the Commanders. Commanders had the 3rd highest pressure rate allowed in week 1. The Giants had the 5th highest pressure rate forced on defense. So another really good sack spot for the Giants, especially if Daniel Jones can just do something on offense, get ahead, force the Commanders to throw it. It could be another spot, though, where you're sitting there with the Giants being like, okay, great spot here. But if the Giants offense can't do anything, the Commanders are perfectly fine sitting there and running the ball plenty, and that's obviously going to hurt you as an opposing defense. So that is how the waiver wire is looking in week 2. We'll see if we need to add anyone after the Monday night game. Hopefully not. Hopefully everyone stays healthy. I'll update the table on the website need be, but for right now, I think the website, the table on the website looks pretty good for how much fab and what order I would rank all these players in. Rankings go up tomorrow. We're going to have trade target video on Wednesday, start sits on Thursday. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you don't miss any of those. That, my friends, is it in this one. And thanks for watching.